Hey everybody, what's up? Ehren here, Question Period Canada. Chilly in Nova Scotia. It was sunny today, but still chilly. And they'll be discussing the temperatures and heating costs today. Things have been getting so heated on the Hill. The Liberals are freaking out. The Conservatives keep attacking. The new Mr. Speaker of the House, Greg Fergus, can't control any of it. I bet you this week we see a change in his demeanor. I bet you he starts coming out a little more forceful instead of trying to get everybody to kumbaya and sing along, get together. He's going to have to lay down the law. Anyhow, we're going to jump right in. Believe it's going to be a very interesting week in Canadian politics.
Questions orale, oral
Let's
questions.
get going. Here we go. Oral questions.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
All right.
Quebecers have known for a long time now that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. But the
Get some
Bloc
likes
doesn't
going.
seem to understand that. The Bloc apparently wants to drastically increase taxes. And they even support differential and preferential application of the taxes. And we've heard in the media that there's been a guarantee that the Liberal Prime Minister will remain in power for another 2 years. So yet another costly coalition. What concessions did the Prime Minister make to the Bloc Québécois in order to stay in power for another 2 years?
Just hanging on to
Honourable
every
Deputy
bit of
Prime
time they
Minister.
can. Oh
Mr.
no.
Speaker, our government was proud to follow in Quebec's footsteps when it comes to daycare. Our government is also very proud to follow in Quebec's footsteps when it comes to climate action. Quebec has led very well. Quebec was one of the first provinces to put a price on pollution. And we are very happy to work with all Quebecers for the environment.
I love it when she speaks in French because we don't have to hear her voice. We get the translator.
Yes, but my question was for the Prime Minister, who is hiding and who is not worth the cost. My question is about the Bloc Québécois' decision to vote in favor of home heating taxes. Today, though, we've learned that the Bloc's desire to drastically increase this Prime Minister's carbon taxes are not random. The Bloc Québécois, in fact, has promised the Prime Minister that they will keep him in power in a 2-year costly coalition. What concessions did the Bloc get in order to keep this incompetent and costly Prime Minister in power?
What was the deal? That'll be interesting to find out. Probably not going to get the answer right here, though.
Mr. Speaker.
Pablo.
The opposition leader wants to talk about Quebec. Fine. The opposition leader wants to move Quebec backwards. They want to move Quebec backwards on basic rights, women's rights, climate change. They want to put firearms back in the streets in Quebec. The Conservative leader, he wants to send Quebecers and Canadians back to the Stone Age.
Back to the Stone Age for Quebecers, eh? That's what Pablo's
Prime
saying?
Minister's in Ottawa today, so the question is for him. He is panicked now and put a pause on the carbon tax for 3% of Canadians in ridings where his polls are plummeting and his MPs are revolting. Also revolting were the comments of a Liberal rural affairs minister who stated that other Canadians would have got a pause on the pain if they had elected more Liberals, yet Northern Ontarians did elect Liberals. So the question for the Prime Minister, will he allow a free vote for his Northern MPs on our common sense motion to keep the heat on and take the tax off?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I have explained to the Leader of the Opposition through many different question periods over the past number of days, home heating oil is 2 to 4 times as expensive as natural gas. It accelerated by 75% in 2022. We have put into place a plan that will enable people to get off of heating oil, to have free heat pumps. It will save them up to $2,500 a year. It will make it more affordable, and at the same time, it will allow us to fight climate change. That is true for the 270,000 households that use heating oil here in Ontario.
They keep talking about
The
these
Honourable
free
Leader of the
heat pumps.
Opposition.
The
I don't
question
believe in
was for the Prime
free
Minister,
things.
who first was dividing
Somebody
and now
pays.
is in hiding. He wants to quadruple his tax, but now he's had to back down and give a pause to the pain for 3% of people in ridings where his polls are plummeting and his MPs are in full revolt against him. His Liberal Minister of Rural Affairs said if people in other regions want the same pause on the pain, they have to elect Liberal MPs. However, many did. We have a Liberal MP in Calgary and one in Edmonton. Will they be allowed a free vote on the common sense Conservative motion to take the tax off and keep the heat on?
Wish we could turn the heat on, I know that.
The Honourable Minister.
It's important to have thoughtful public policy prescriptions that address issues around affordability in a long-term way, but also actually address the issue of climate change. And I would say, Mr. Speaker, the only person who is hiding in this chamber is the Leader of the official opposition, who is hiding the fact that he either does not believe in climate change, or he certainly doesn't think it's very important. He has not spoken the words climate change since he was elected, and he has no plan. At some point, he needs to tell Canadians, what is your plan to address the climate crisis?
I don't think the carbon tax is the solution
The Honourable Leader of the
to
Opposition.
climate
Mr.
change
Speaker, I'm
challenges.
right here while the Prime Minister hides and divides. And why wouldn't he hide? After all, he's in panic mode. He first promised to quadruple the tax on everyone, and then after I beat him in that debate, he decided to back down and lift the tax off 3% of people for a short period of time. His Rural Affairs Minister said that if other Canadians wanted the same pause from the pain, they needed to elect more Liberals. Well, Thunder Bay elected 2 Liberals. It's a very cold place. Will the members for Thunder Bay be given a free vote on our motion to take the tax off and keep the heat on?
Where is Trudeau today? No Trudeau, right? So that's a
The Honourable
4-day
Deputy
weekend?
Prime Minister,
I
Minister
think he
of
was there on
Finance.
Thursday was the last time?
Speaker, let me tell you who is missing in action when it comes to protecting Canadians and their affordability. And I'm talking about the affordability of life for our seniors. You know who's missing in action? The Conservative leader. It took him 29 days to speak up for the Canada Pension Plan. But none of us should have been surprised, because last year he sought to eviscerate that plan, which is so important to every single Canadian, by seeking to freeze contributions. We can't trust Conservatives with our pensions or anything else.
What a voice. I find she's one of the hardest ones to listen to. So condescending.
Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, last week, TVA had to lay off 1/3 of its workforce. That's 547 Quebec television professionals out of work in one fell swoop. It's tragic. And if it's happening at TVA, it's bound to happen elsewhere. It's inevitable. We can't just turn a blind eye and claim that the new version of the Broadcasting Act and C-18 will solve the problem. They won't, not at all. So the question is simple. Are we going to watch television die little by little and not do anything about it? Or is the government prepared to rethink everything in order to save conventional TV?
He's making some good
Gonna
points
have me?
there. I know that we're not
Minister.
big fans of the Bloc, but he is
Mr.
making some good
Speaker?
points.
First, my thoughts go out to employees who have been affected by this layoff. And my thoughts are also with their families at the beginning of the holiday seasons. Unfortunately, in telecommunications and in journalism, there is a rapidly changing landscape since the advent of online streaming services and online platforms. We will work with all parties in this House to implement all solutions that we can, because our cultural industries are essential for our democracy and for our society. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I can't
Honourable
figure
Member
out
for
Pascal. Like, her answers are always
TV
really
is
short.
the channel through which
Cuts herself
information
off.
is shared with the people. The channel through which our culture is shared. Television reminds us of who we are, what we can create, and what makes us unique. Something that the YouTubes, Netflixes, and Disneys of this world will never be able to do. Our television is made by us and for us, and it's truly in danger. As we watch our channels disappearing and turning off, we're waiting for Ottawa to turn them back on. But it's urgent. What will it take for the government to wake up?
we're making this original.
The
This is
Honourable
for us,
Heritage Minister.
by
Thank
us,
you, Mr.
I think.
Speaker.
It is
I
for
share
us.
my colleagues' concerns. That's why in 2020 we introduced for the first time an act to modernize the Broadcasting Act. But unfortunately, the Conservatives have been blocking it and blocking it. They have tried to block us from trying to modernize our audiovisual universe and our media landscape. Today, the Conservatives claim that we're trying to censure Canadians, but what we truly want is quality journalism everywhere in the country. We want a thriving cultural industry and creative industry that's essential for democracy and for all of society. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
A lot of
The
body
honourable
language
member
for
for
such a
Vancouver
low tone.
East.
For 3 decades, Liberals and Conservatives relied on the private market, and now the average rent for a one-bedroom is $2,500 a month. The government's own housing advocate is calling for more community housing that fit people's budgets. And the Bank of Canada says investing in social housing wouldn't be inflationary. The Conservative leader is calling investment in social housing a Soviet-style takeover. He's in it for wealthy investors. The Liberals are failing Canadians. Will the Prime Minister stop siding with Conservatives and commit to doubling Canada's social housing stock?
Jenny kind of hung herself up there.
The Honourable Minister
Couldn't get
for
through the
Housing.
piece she was trying to
Mr.
read.
Speaker, I agree wholeheartedly with my colleague about the Conservative leader's
dancing
rhetoric
clown.
around Soviet-style housing to describe cooperatives. It mirrors the same approach he took over the course of the summer when he labeled a Niagara woman's home a shack. Dismissing the living quarters of ordinary Canadians is entirely inappropriate. I further agree with the NDP member that we need to continue to make the kinds of investments that will build more social housing for low-income families. We got back into this game, into the National Housing Strategy after 30 years of absence. We're going to continue to build more homes so everyone can afford a roof over their head.
Sean's pretty funny. He's a dancing clown. Can't stand
The
still.
honourable member from
Always.
Elmwood, Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, people in Newfoundland and Labrador could certainly use some help when it comes to their costs. 77% are saying that they're living paycheck to paycheck. But what we continue to get are answers that are not a commitment to doubling that social housing stock or to recapitalize funds that the government's already created to build social housing, even when it doesn't cost them money. They won't lift a finger. We stood by as we watched the Competition Bureau fight tooth and nail against the Rogers-Shaw merger. The government turned around and approved it. Now they have a chance to support our initiative to strengthen the Competition Act. Will they do it?
Will they do it? Probably not.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for
Okay.
his question. In fact, Mr.
FTC.
Speaker, him and member of this House will have an opportunity
Weirdo.
to do something for Canadians. I've asked the leader of the opposition to do one thing for Canadians, not something he does very often, but one thing, was to vote for C-56, Mr. Speaker, because in C-56, Canadians will be happy to learn that at home, but we're going to reform competition, Mr. Speaker. We're going to give more power to the competition commissioner. We're going to remove these mergers that are harmful to competition, and we're going to remove these clauses that are hurting competitions. We want more competition, lower prices in this country, Mr. Speaker.
He's a funny little dude.
The Honourable Leader of the
Weird,
Opposition.
right?
The NDP voted 16 times in favor of the carbon tax. Its leader has supported quadrupling the tax on the home heating of every single Canadian. But after working-class union households have been abandoning his party for the Conservatives in droves, he has now flip-flopped. But that has involved the courage of admitting he was wrong. Will the Prime Minister show the same courage and admit he, just like the NDP leader, is dead wrong and vote for our common sense motion to keep the heat on and take the tax off?
Get rid of this tax. For everyone. Across the board.
The
Across the
Honourable
country.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I find it
Oh,
helpful
no.
when you deal with people who are closest to the problem. And in Atlantic, Canada, we have an Ecology Action Centre based in Halifax who wrote a statement that I think was prescient to the debate that's going on here. It says, energy poverty and climate change represent a direct threat to working class people in Nova Scotia. As a society, we must work together to ensure households with low incomes can transition away from expensive fossil fuels to technologies like heat pumps that are cheaper, better for our health, and afford us the comforts associated with heating and cooling. Policy makers are finally rising to meet the challenge, Mr. Speaker.
Seamus O'Regan is an awkward little guy, too. What do you guys think of Seamus?
The Honourable Member member from Regina.
Sometimes he can be funny, but
After
he
8
misses
years,
a lot
the
of his
Prime Minister
jokes.
is just not worth the cost. Now he wants to quadruple the tax on home heating, gas, and groceries. But he decided to pause the pain for just 3% of families in areas where he's plummeting in the polls and his MPs are revolting. The Liberal Rural Affairs Minister said that if people on the prairies wanted a break from the carbon tax exemption, they should have elected more Liberal MPs. Well, the people in Sudbury did elect a Liberal. I visited there last week, and people there want to know why their MP has been unable to get them a pause on the pain. So simple question for the Prime Minister. Will he allow a free vote for the member for Sudbury on our motion to take the tax off and keep the heat on?
I don't think there's going to be any free votes for the Liberals. What do you think?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important for Canadians that people are serious in terms of bringing forward policy prescriptions, not simply taglines. We have put into place measures that will address a critical affordability issue. Home heating oil is 2 to 4 times as expensive as natural gas. It went up 75% during 2022. There is an opportunity to be able to reduce the energy cost for people on an ongoing basis, all the while addressing the issue of climate change, something that the Leader of the Opposition clearly does not believe in. It is something that is important for Canada. It's important for the 270,000 Ontario homes that currently heat with heating oil.
Jonathan says the exact same thing almost every time.
Are in complete carbon tax chaos over there, Mr. Speaker. Their pause on the pain
Andrew
doesn't
Scheer's
apply
all
to
right.
97% of Canadians, and it punishes those who use cleaner Canadian natural gas and propane to heat their homes. What did the Liberal Rural Affairs Minister have to say? She said, well, if people in other areas want the pause too, they should elect Liberals. Well, the people in North Bay did elect a Liberal MP. So again, to the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, will he allow a free vote so that the members from North Bay can vote on our motion to take the tax off and keep the heat on?
Where is Trudeau all these days? What is he doing? You would think that he has to be or should be there for question period more often than he has been. Oh, Greg is back.
He knows that all questions, I will remind all members that all questions are directed through the chair. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
There's a change in tone already. Did you notice that?
Last week, it would be great if in this House we could have debates about how we fight climate change, not whether we fight climate change, because in 2023 it's really not an option. It's an existential threat, and we're living in a climate emergency. And Canadians know how important it is to fight climate change, and they know that on this point the Conservatives have absolutely no plan. When you don't have a plan for the environment, you don't have a plan for the economy, Mr. Speaker, those Conservatives continue to be risky and irresponsible, and they're certainly not worth that risk.
So that's Adam Van Coverden,
The Honourable Member
and he's
from
breaking
Thornhill.
the Speaker's rules.
Liberal NDP government, the Prime Minister's carbon tax is making it impossible
Listen,
for
Lansman's
Canadians
great.
to heat their homes this winter. That's especially true right here in soon-to-be frigid Ottawa. There are 12 Liberal MPs here, a cabinet minister, 3 privy councillors, 4 parliamentary secretaries, but according to the minister from Newfoundland, all of these MPs weren't effective enough to get their communities a pause on the pain of the carbon tax. Will they make things right and stand with us today and axe the tax, or will they vote again with the Prime Minister and leave Ottawa residents in the cold?
She always does this look. She always like a hanging look.
The
It's
Honourable
fun.
Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And you know, there was a time when Canadian progressive conservative voters could rely on members of that conservative caucus for leadership on fighting climate change. In fact, the member from Wellington Halton Hills staked his entire conservative leadership campaign on it. What he said exactly, and I quote, is, "The right way to do it is to price carbon through a revenue-neutral carbon tax." He staked his entire Conservative leadership campaign on that. Sadly, he lost. But you know, Mr. Speaker, I agree with him when he said we don't have a plan to fight climate change and reduce emissions, then we won't win the next election. That was true in 2019, that was true in 2021, and it's true today.
He's doing a lot of pointing. Adam is well-spoken, at least. A little bit too pretty for me, but
The Prime Minister can pause the pain for some Canadians, then surely he can do it for all Canadians. These Liberal MPs should be demanding that. But they are missing in action. Like the MIA Liberals from the GTA, like that member. Their communities want relief from this costly coalition, but they've been hiding for a week. So I'll give them the chance to show up now.
She's sticking it to them.
Will the Prime Minister allow the members whose phone number starts with 905 a free vote to take the tax off so their communities can keep the heat on?
Fire the look. There it is. She does this look, it's
The
funny.
Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oh,
Mr.
no.
Speaker, what my honourable colleagues could continue to forget is that this policy does apply right across the country.
That's
so
right.
whether you are in the GTA, whether you are in Northern Ontario, whether you are in Saskatchewan or Manitoba
Look at
or
Freeland.
anywhere else in this country, the price on pollution has been removed for those that use home heating oil, Mr. Speaker. It would be good if the Conservatives actually focused on the facts and allowed us to debate climate change and how we're going to fight it, not if climate change is real or not. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good answer.
Oh, listen to Freeland. Sour Patch Fates.
The Honourable Member from Kenora.
The Prime Minister is planning to quadruple the tax on heat, gas, and groceries, but he decided to pause the pain for 3% of families in areas where he's plummeting in the polls and where his MPs are revolting. The Liberal Rural Affairs Minister has said if others wanted the pause, then they should have voted Liberal. But people in Nickel Belt voted for a Liberal MP, Mr. Speaker, yet they are not seeing a pause in this tax. So will the Prime Minister today allow the member from Nickel Belt a free vote to vote with us to take the tax off and keep the heat on for people in Northern Ontario and right across the country?
So I'm in Nova Scotia and I'm happy that oil or the tax is being taken off of oil, but I can't believe it's not across the country.
I am so proud to be a Northern Liberal member of Parliament because what I do every day, Mr. Speaker, is I work with constituents who are telling me we need to take faster action on the climate because we are losing acres of forest, Mr. Speaker, because we are seeing droughts, yes, even in Northern Ontario, Mr. Speaker, making it harder to grow food, making it harder to grow our economy. My constituents expect me to advocate for a clean environment, and that's exactly what I'll do.
I don't think all of her constituents want her advocating for that.
The Honourable Member for Montarville. Mr. Speaker, let's talk about immigration targets. Allow me to cite a document. Starting in 2026, set the annual immigration target at some 500,000 immigrants if the population reaches 40 million as planned. You might think that I'm quoting the plan that the Liberals announced last week. But no, I'm quoting McKinsey's Century Initiative. The capping of targets announced for 2026 has literally been McKinsey's plan all along. When is the federal government going to adjust the targets based on our integration capacity instead of blindly following the advice of McKinsey, which is a private company that literally manages immigration in Canada?
I always get confused when the Bloc makes their points.
Mr. Speaker, I think that's an
Ronald.
odd comment. The Bloc is so out of left field. They're so far out in the field that they should go out into the fields and see agriculture workers and see if they need some help. Quebec needs temporary foreign workers. We are working with Quebec, and the Bloc should understand that.
He's a weird one. He's a goofy
The
clown.
member for Montarville. Mr. Speaker, not only is Ottawa following McKinsey, Ottawa is following them blindly. McKinsey themselves confirmed that their immigration targets do not take integration capacity into account. Former CEO Dominic Barton said in committee last year, "The focus was solely on the economy. We were not thinking about the social context. We were thinking about productivity." Mr. Speaker, capping immigration targets at 500,000 means applying advice that does not take into account our integration capacity. But the government, last week, promised to respect our integration capacity. So will the government review its targets? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mark's so weird.
I never talked to McKinsey. I talked to Canadians who want more foreign workers. They want more immigrants to come and work in factories and in the fields. 500,000 is a reasonable target. It's a target 3 years down the line, and it has nothing to do with McKinsey's advice.
And his answers are so much shorter than everybody else's.
Mr. Speaker, the only difference between Ottawa and McKinsey is that Ottawa is going faster. McKinsey predicted that the population would hit 40 million by 2026. We reached that mark in June. According to Stats Canada, if the 2022 and 2023 trend continues, the population will double in just 25 years. The population will exceed 80 million by 2048, regardless of our integration capacity for housing, health, education, French language training, and the list goes on. Mr. Speaker, when will this government finally understand that successful immigration means respecting our integration capacity?
They expect the population to double in the next 25 years. That's pretty crazy. It's a lot.
Over the past year, Canadians have asked us to do more when it comes to integration capacity. But what people have also told me is that we need immigration to help our businesses grow. There is still a labor shortage. The approach that we need to prioritize is to be more strategic with our targets. We tabled new strategic targets just recently, and the Bloc should be comforted by that if they like immigration, and if they don't, then let them say so.
From Parry Sound, Muskoka.
The Prime Minister plans to quadruple the carbon tax on heat, gas, and groceries. Now, he decided to pause the pain for 3% of families where his poll numbers were plummeting and his MPs were revolting. The Liberal World Affairs Minister said if people in the prairies wanted a carbon tax break, they should elect Liberals. Well, the people in Sault Ste. Marie, Mr. Speaker, did elect a Liberal MP, and yet the majority of his constituents are not getting the break. Will the Prime Minister allow the MP from Sault Ste. Marie to freely vote to take the tax off and keep the heat on for the people of the Sioux?
There is no free vote. Very similar to there is no free heat pumps.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
There's nothing
The Conservative
free.
Party, as is often the case, is leaving out many important facts. 8 out of 10 Canadian families actually get more money back in the rebate than they pay in the price on pollution.
I don't believe
It is
that.
an important part of having a robust plan to address climate change in a thoughtful way. With respect to home heating, it is a particular issue that we can invest in to ensure that we are actually saving money for people as we move forward while continuing to address climate change. The Conservative Party is hiding. They are hiding from science. They are hiding from evidence. They need to have a plan to fight climate change. Canadians expect more.
I do expect more, but I don't expect more carbon tax.
South Glengarry.
Come
Canadians
on.
are watching for today's vote on our common sense Conservative motion to take the tax off all forms of home heating for all Canadians. The Liberal Rural Affairs Minister said, though, that if people want a pause on the tax, they should have elected more Liberals in their region. But Thunder Bay did elect 2 Liberal MPs, and yet folks there aren't getting any pause. Instead, the Prime Minister plans to quadruple the tax on heat, gas, and groceries rather than treating them fairly. So the question is, will the Prime Minister allow these 2 Liberal MPs from Thunder Bay to vote freely to take the tax off so people can keep the heat on?
Let's just pay attention to how they dodged this question now, because pretty direct question about a free vote. Let's see how they...
Mr. Speaker, again, the Conservatives continue to spread information in this chamber. This pause on the price on pollution on home heating oil applies right across the country, despite what the Conservatives keep saying. But what is particularly concerning, and I think I speak on behalf of every Ontario Member of Parliament and many Ontario residents, is every time they say common sense, it brings up the terrible memories of the Mike Harris years, when not only did they slash public services, but they slashed them in such incredible ways that led to things like Walkerton. Mr. Speaker, Ontarians remember, and they're not going to elect common sense Conservatives again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
She has been coming with a little bit more gusto lately. She freaked out last week 2 times. And it was fun. She got in trouble with the House Speaker. A little bit.
Here's just how out of touch and tone deaf the Liberals are. When asked if she'd support giving the same pause on home heating back home, their own minister right from Thunder Bay said, quote, "We don't have the same challenges in Northern Ontario that we see in Atlantic Canada," unquote. Well, I visited Thunder Bay last week, and let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, it gets very cold there too, just like Atlantic Canada. And after 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, the cost of living crisis there is so bad, the regional food bank can't keep up with surging demand. Now at 12,000 people. Will the Prime Minister let his Thunder Bay MPs vote to give residents fair treatment, take the tax off, they can keep the heat on?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr.
the
Speaker.
Conservative Provincial Finance Minister of Ontario knows that pensions matter for the people of Ontario. That's why he wrote me a letter asking me to convene a meeting of all the provincial finance ministers to defend our pensions. Will the Conservative MPs from Ontario be equally courageous and responsible in defending the pensions of the people of Ontario and support our effort to keep the pensions of all Canadians safe.
Oh my God, she's torture to listen to, guys. Do you not find, folks, that she is just
I'm
awful?
going to ask all members, please,
Oh, Lord.
especially the member from Battle River, Battle Creek, Battle River Crowfoot, to please listen to the responses which are offered and to take the floor. And I'd ask all members to listen to that member when that member does take the floor. The honourable member from London Fanshawe.
His demeanor is different.
Canadians in my riding did
it's different than it had been last
work
week.
with Global Affairs Canada to get their loved ones out of Gaza. They put all of their hopes on Sunday's evacuation, only to hear nothing from Canadian officials. The bombardments are getting more intense. My constituents, their families, Canadian citizens are trapped. They need this government to stand for human rights and to protect lives. The heads of 18 UN agencies and NGOs and my constituents are calling for a ceasefire. Why can't the Prime Minister?
I don't think that Canada calling a ceasefire over there has much of an impact on what's going to happen.
The situation in Gaza is dire, and many Canadians are worried about their loved ones. What is happening on the ground is fluid and unpredictable, and we know there are delays at the Rafah crossing for all countries. I want to reassure Canadians that we are in regular contact with Egypt and Israel to push for Canadians to leave as soon as possible. We continually try to reach all Canadians, permanent residents and their immediate family members to convey the latest information. Mr. Speaker, that's why we continue to call for humanitarian pauses for Canadians to get out, for aid to get in, and for all hostages to be released. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Of course, I do hope all Canadians can get out of there, but calling it ceasefire, I don't think it makes a difference.
18 United Nations agencies and international NGOs, including UNICEF and Save the Children, called for an immediate ceasefire in Israel-Palestine, expressing shock and horror at the mounting death toll from the conflict, saying it's a graveyard for children. It's been 30 days. Enough is enough. The UN and the NGO heads sent in a rare joint statement. This must stop now. When will this government finally do what most of the world has called for, and that's an immediate ceasefire to save the children right now?
Ooh, moly, he brought that, making his point.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We unequivocally condemn the Hamas terrorist attack. The price of justice cannot be the continued suffering of all Palestinian civilians. What is unfolding in Gaza is a human tragedy. The Minister of Foreign Affairs has been to the region twice to oversee our efforts to help Canadians, but also to de-escalate the situation. That's why we continue to call for international humanitarian law to be upheld and for humanitarian pauses so that Canadians can leave, humanitarian aid can get in, and all hostages are released. Canada is committed to a goal of a just and lasting peace in the Middle East.
Pam is boring.
From Yukon.
This just in.
We know that many Canadian families are struggling to make ends meet, and this is particularly the case in the Yukon, where more than half of families spend over 30% of their income on housing. The Minister of National Revenue recently made an important announcement alongside Ms. Tracy Ann McPhee, Yukon Minister of Health and Social Services. Can the Minister of National Revenue inform the House of this announcement and how it will affect our Yukon families?
Bravo.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to announce that Yukon families can now apply for the Canada Child Benefit when registering for the birth of their newborn through the automated benefits application service of Yukon Vital Statistics Office. It's the quickest and easiest way to apply for and receive the benefit.
She's a WEF
it's
member.
More than $5,500 on average per year for Yukon families. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
It's interesting how many MPs
honourable
from the
member from
Liberal Party
Mégantic-Clérable.
have ties to.
After 8 years of this
Economic
Liberal
Forum.
government, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost, and they want to stay in power for the next 2 years. The Liberal Bloc coalition will vote against our motion to eliminate or pause the carbon tax on all forms of heating. Yes, it's expensive to vote for the Bloc as well. Does it not bother the Bloc to vote the Liberals for the next 2 years? What promise did the Prime Minister make for the unconditional support of the Bloc? The Honourable Minister.
What was the deal, I wonder? What was the deal?
We seem to have found ourselves in a time machine here. They wanted to make a step back in terms of the rights of women and take steps back in terms of climate change and the fight against it. They're not even able to describe climate change. They want to bring us back to the Stone Age. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. We're looking at a government from the Stone Age. We are going to vote on a motion that will require the government to pause all carbon tax on home heating for all Canadians. The Bloc has chosen its camp. They want to radically increase the carbon tax, and it's imposed, it's in favor of a 20% extra tax to each litre of gas. It's expensive to vote Bloc. What did the Prime Minister promise its partner, the Bloc, to raise taxes on the backs of all Quebecers? The Honourable Minister, Mr. Speaker, for a rare
What do you think of Pablo,
time,
guys?
I agree with my
What do you think?
colleague. We are going to have a government from the Stone Age. We're taking a step back on fundamental rights in terms of arms control, a step back in terms of the fight against climate change. He has clearly said this. We're going back to the Stone Age, Mr. Speaker. This is incredible. We'll never take a step back.
Going back to the Stone Age, says Pablo.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent.
All right.
Mr.
Gerard.
Speaker, after eight years of this Liberal government, who would have believed it? The Bloc is now behind supporting the Liberal government morally. They seem to be getting along quite well because their position in terms of heating divided Canadians. But that's exactly what the Bloc wants to do, divide and create problems. The Bloc wants to radically increase carbon tax. It will inspire them. My question is that will members be able to vote for common sense?
Greg's taking a stand.
I think all members would like colleagues, order. I think all colleagues would like to hear the answer from the Honourable Minister. The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, my colleague was the last person to speak at the National Assembly before the adoption of the carbon market. It was adopted via unanimous consent. If he didn't like it then, why didn't he raise his voice then and speak against it? Why did he change his position today? Because he didn't speak out against unanimity at the time. What has changed for my colleague over the past few years? He wants to go back to the Stone Age, and we won't go there, Mr. Speaker.
Notice now she's going to end up putting on a mask. What's the point? What's the point of putting the mask on?
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, another thing means that the Bloc is really buddy-buddy with the Liberal Party.
He's fun to watch.
Parti Québécois budget. It talks about the poor management of the Liberal government is now an argument in favor of independence. No, we're not going back to the Trudeau Stone Age, that's for sure. Will the Bloc's members be able to speak up and make sure that all of their members will be able to vote for common sense?
He's fun, man. He's got those crazy eyes, eh?
Order.
It's getting out of hand. You can see that
The Honourable Minister.
the temperature is rising.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're seeing
What's
once
up with
again
that?
that every time a Conservative member rises, there's something hiding. They're not able to say the truth. They're not able to take responsibility for what they did in the past. It's really rare when you have a Quebec colleague. Well, when they supported the carbon market, they should have been proud of what happened in Quebec and proud to be able to protect the environment across Canada.
She's a pretty funny lady. Now, why would she put on the mask now? What are you going to protect yourself from?
The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, More than 221,000 SMEs are at risk of bankruptcy if the federal government does not defer repayment of CEBA loans without the loss of the subsidy. We're not talking about billionaire multinational companies. We're talking about small businesses that contribute to the vitality of our regions. Here in Rivière-du-Nord, 213 SMEs have alerted the Quebec Federation of Independent Businesses that bankruptcy is looming. Mr. Speaker, when will the minister finally offer businesses the postponement they're asking for and avoid a wave of bankruptcies on her conscience? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker.
Oh, no.
We've already granted small businesses 1 additional year to refund part of the CEBA loan. When they asked for more assistance, we offered greater flexibility in terms of refinancing and more time, and a 1-year prolongation of the deadline for the refund. Unlike the Conservatives, that will bring us back to the Stone Age. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, there's Greg.
Order.
Order.
The Honourable Member for
Seems so quiet.
Poilievre. Mr. Speaker, it's even worse in
It's
Poilievre.
elevating.
288 SMEs have said that they'll go bankrupt if the federal government doesn't postpone repayment of CEBA loans for 1 year with no loss of the subsidies. 288 business bankruptcies. Imagine the number of job losses that this would represent. The minister cannot condone this by her inaction. Does she know how many bankruptcies are likely to occur in her region? Can she justify, how can she justify to these entrepreneurs that she's going to turn their back on them rather than offer them a 1-year postponement as they've requested?
That's a really interesting suit.
The Honourable
None of it
Deputy
matches.
Prime Minister,
Oh,
Mr.
no.
Speaker.
Oh, no.
We are proud of having created a program that provided $49 billion in support to our SMEs across the country. And what's important today is that small businesses have until December 31st, 2026 to refund their CEBA loan in full. We are here for our small businesses in Quebec and across Canada at these essential times. The Honourable Member
I
for
think Freeland might be my least
Mr.
favorite.
Speaker, after
Hard to
8
watch.
years of this Liberal government, food banks are overflowing, groceries cost more, and now today the Bloc is supporting the Liberals to maintain the carbon tax on the back of Quebecers. Mr. Speaker, it costs expensive to vote for the Bloc. It's expensive. Are the Liberals forming new coalition with the Bloc to increase taxes on the backs of Quebecers?
Hey, that's pretty good.
Order.
Order.
Oh, my God. He had conviction in his voice that time. Did you hear it? And you can see his face is changing. He's more upset. And now he's playing with his button, and he's got them turned off. So I wonder how long he's going to let this go on. Just standing there. He does look like he's poorly rested, or that the stress is having an impact. Interesting, yeah?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Merci, monsieur.
Didn't
Thank
say
you, Mr.
anything.
Speaker. Unfortunately, I have to explain this once again. There is no carbon price in Quebec, a tax rather. Canadians are concerned by climate change, and we need a plan, Mr. Speaker. Those Conservatives, Mr. Speaker, are not worth the risk, and that is why we created a system. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I think he's probably an arrogant little dude.
From St. Albert, Edmonton.
It is getting hot on the floor, though.
This NDP Liberal government,
elevating.
Alberta got shafted yet again. With Liberal support collapsing in Atlantic Canada, this desperate Prime Minister gave Atlantic Canadians a pause on his punitive carbon tax on home heating, while Albertans got nothing. Today, the Liberal minister from Edmonton Centre has a choice. will he support our common sense conservative motion to axe the tax on home heating, or will he once again sell out his constituents to his boss, the Prime Minister?
That guy has a really funny voice. Like, his voice is funny.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank
Okay,
the honourable member for
Randy
his question.
Bolsonaro,
He
he's
knows
funny.
well that we have billions of dollars in Budget 23 for carbon capture, use, and storage. We have green and clean electricity regulations and money that will benefit Alberta. But, Mr. Speaker, that member doesn't want people to know that he's one of the CPC Silent 30 who have not come to the aid of Albertans. He is not defending the Canada Pension Plan. He doesn't care that the Conservative government of Alberta are scaring pensioners. He's silent. We're going to protect pensions. That's our job, and we're going to do it every day.
Randy's a funny little guy, too. They've got a whole bunch of funny clowns. He bobs back and forth when he's talking and always puts his hand in his pocket.
Mr. plans on quadrupling the tax on gas, groceries, and home heating. He gave 3% of Canadians a pause on the carbon tax for home heating, where his poll numbers were tanking and his MPs were revolting. The Liberal Rural Affairs Minister said if people on the prairies want to pause on the tax, they should elect more Liberals. Well, the MP of Calgary Skyview is a Liberal, but his constituents don't get the pause. Will the Prime Minister let that member mail in a free vote on our common sense conservative motion to take the tax off and keep the heat on, and shove this carbon tax where the Prime Minister's poll numbers are, in the gutter?
Shove these. Oh, that's pretty good. Howland's pretty good. Very well spoken. Oh, and now Greg. Greg can't handle it. Can't handle it. How long is he going to stand there, interrupt things?
The Honourable Minister.
Not too long.
Speaker, another silent Conservative on the issue of pensions in Alberta. What a shame to be a Calgary Conservative. But, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about Conservative priorities coming out of Alberta. Instead of building housing, instead of growing our economy, instead of actually doing the work of Albertans, what does the UCP AGM, what are their priorities, Mr. Speaker? Turning back protections for LGBTQ2 people, taking our province back. Mr. Speaker, they're actually voted in favor of conspiracy theories when it comes to voting machines and 15-minute cities. They're out of touch, and they are reckless and not worth the cost.
It's pretty entertaining. Randy's heated today. Poilievre made fun of him last week for being funny looking, and I think it hurt his feelings. And now Greg is playing with his button. Did you see that? If you pay attention, you can see every time he shuts him off. You can see what he's doing.
I ask all members to please listen to their whips in terms of having more order in this House so that we can hear not only the questions, but the answers.
His tone is different today.
His
His patience seems to be wearing
Thank you,
thin.
Mr. Speaker. I am very proud of our national content
This lady
creators,
always
whether in
just does
Quebec
the
or elsewhere in
tee-ups.
Canada. Last week, Montrealers once again welcomed people from all over the world to Cinemania, a festival that has enjoyed nearly 3 decades of success and showcased some of the most incredible francophone voices and creations that Canada has to share. Can the minister tell us more about the important international agreement that was signed last Friday?
Yeah, they do these
The
boring
Honourable
tee-ups and they're
Minister of
lame.
Canadian Heritage.
They're so
Thank you,
lazy
Mr.
about
Speaker.
it.
My colleague is absolutely right. Canada last week welcomed for the first time in Canada the President of Switzerland, and my colleague, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, signed a co-protection audiovisual agreement to increase the number of films and projects with higher budgets. So it's an excellent piece of news for our creators in Canada. This was international efforts. We're going to continue to support our audiovisual producers because we know how important they are in Canada.
I don't know about Pascal Saint-Onge.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister plans to quadruple the tax on heat, gas, and groceries. But now he's decided to pause the pain for just 3% of families in areas where he's plummeting in the polls. The Liberal Rural Affairs Minister said if people on the prairies wanted a pause on the tax, they should have elected more Liberals. But the people in St. Boniface, St. Vital did elect a Liberal MP, and yet his constituents aren't getting the pause. So the question is, will the Prime Minister allow the MP for St. Boniface, St. Vital to freely vote to take the tax off, keep the heat on for his constituents?
He doesn't speak very often.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member is talking about a national program that risks to get rid of polluting, expensive home heating oil and to transition those homes with free heat pumps into those homes. Mr. Speaker, this national program is applicable across Canada. It's applicable in Manitoba, where are thousands of people who use home heating oil. It's great for the environment. It's great for affordability. I plan to support this.
Dan Bandel was having trouble there, getting it out.
From Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
The Prime Minister plans to quadruple the tax on heat, gas, and groceries. But then he decided to pause the pain for 3% of families in areas where he was plummeting in the polls and his MPs were revolting. The Liberal Rural Affairs Minister actually said if people on the prairies wanted a pause on the tax, they should have elected more Liberals. But here's the thing, the people of Winnipeg South Centre did elect a Liberal MP, and yet his constituents are not getting the pause. Will the Prime Minister allow that MP from Winnipeg South Centre a free vote to take the tax off and keep the heat on for people in his community?
They're focusing on one point, and it's to make it even across the board for everybody.
Once again, I'd like to encourage all members, colleagues, all members to please hold your comments back to the time that you have the floor to ask a question or to give an answer. That way we can hear everything that's going on from all ends of the House. The Honourable Minister.
That is a much different tone than he was using before.
That member to stop spreading misinformation. This is a national program, Mr. Speaker, a national program that aims to transition expensive, environmentally damaging home heating oil into free heating pumps, Mr. Speaker. This is a national policy that's applicable across Canada. There are thousands of homes in Manitoba who are eligible for the program. This is great for the environment. This is great for affordability.
Here, here.
He looks like he's having trouble remembering the details of this
The Honourable Member
program.
from Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, every day the member from Winnipeg North gets up into this place and talks and talks and talks and says absolutely
That's pretty funny.
Says absolutely nothing. According,
They're cheering. They're cheering hard. Oh. Greg's not going to have anything to do with that. Can't let them have any fun. He's so weird.
Once again.
He's different, though.
Before I return to colleagues.
He's changing.
Before I return to the member from Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman, I'm going to ask all colleagues once again to please, when you have the floor, use it. When you don't have the floor, listen to the person who does. The Honourable Member from...
He's speaking more like a person rather than a robot. This is better.
Excuse me. Excuse me.
It's great. Canadian politics should be out of hand.
I know the Honourable Member is anxious. I'd like to give the Honourable Member the opportunity to start his question from the top, please.
well, Mr. Speaker, every day the member from North Winnipeg gets up here and all he does is talk, talk, and talk. Only the Liberals like it because he says absolutely nothing. Now, according to the Rural Affairs Minister, the member from Winnipeg North failed to stand up and fight for Manitobans. Because of him, Manitobans have been left out in the cold. They can't afford to heat and eat after 8 miserable years of this Prime Minister and his punitive carbon tax. Manitobans at this useless Liberal MPs are not worth the cost. Will the Prime Minister allow the member for
Well, they cut him off. They cut him off. Yeah, give him some applause.
I would have liked to have heard the Honourable Member's end of question. Unfortunately, the Honourable Member's time had expired, and then some. This is the reason why it's important for both sides of the House to please allow the member to ask a question without interrupting, so that we can hear the question and the member can profit from the full time that the member would be entitled to. Is the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, thank you.
Interesting.
The member wants to hear more from me. I'm happy to. At the end
fun.
Day, I want to remind members across the way, an issue with the Conservative Party. Remember, I always say they're like a fish on a dock, flip-flopping all over the place, Mr. Speaker? That applies on the carbon price, too. I'll tell you what the leader of the Conservative Party doesn't tell Canadians. He's going to take away the rebate, Mr. Speaker. That's going to take out of the pockets 80% of the constituents of Winnipeg North, the people I represent, money out of their pocket. Shame on the leader for the official opposition for being so reckless and risky, Mr. Speaker.
It's exciting. This is fun to me. They're going at it like Canadian politicians should. Arguing, fighting, bickering, insulting, slinging mud. And Greg turns off the button. He is so now just gonna stand there. His voice has a different tone to it today. Like, he does seem like he's not asking anymore, that he's trying to make some demands. But what is this? How long is he going to go on like that?
The honourable member from Calgary Skyview.
Ooh.
Mr. Speaker, I join Canadians across the country in giving a warm welcome and congratulations to our newest Supreme Court Justice, Mary T. Moreau. Justice Moreau was selected by the Independent Advisory Council, nominated by the Prime Minister, and will be sworn into her new position today. Justice Moreau is a fellow Western Canadian from Alberta who will serve Canadians well in this important role. Can the Minister of Justice and Attorney General inform this House on what makes Justice Moreau the right fit for our Supreme Court, and how will her appointment enhance our country's legal system?
Here's a question. What happened to the Governor General scandal? The one that Alan Reyes broke? He's tried it twice. Just a question. Nobody's touching it. Major media is not. It's weird. Almost as strange as Greg, playing with his button.
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General for Canada.
Thank you to the member from Calgary Skyview for that important question. Justice Moreau is a proud Franco-Albertan and previous Chief Justice of the Court of King's Bench of Alberta. She has a wealth of experience as a trial lawyer, as well as nearly 30 years of experience as a judge. She is a talented legal mind, an outstanding jurist, Mr. Speaker, and an expert in criminal law. And her appointment is a milestone for our country. With Justice Moreau, the judges on Canada's Supreme Court are now represented by a majority of women for the first time in Canadian history.
That's good to hear. And Greg hits his button. See him? You can see him up there. Try to pay attention to what he's doing up there. It's hard to see. I know it's small, but...
The honourable member from North Island, Powell River.
Mr. Speaker, women veterans will be attending commemoration services this week. Many of them will be asked if the medals they are wearing belong to their husband or their son or their father. Too often they feel invisible and diminished, when they should feel acknowledged and respected for their service. This must change. Will the minister commit today to ensuring the participation of women veterans in Remembrance Day commemoration this year?
Sort of out of left field, that question. Is there a problem in that area? I don't know.
Our government's commitment, and I can surely assure you on behalf of the Minister of Veterans Affairs and Associate Minister of Defense, that women will always participate in Remembrance Day ceremonies, and their participation is a must. Thank you.
The honourable member from Spadina, Fort York.
All right,
Mr.
this
Speaker,
is an
Canadians
independent.
are witnessing the glorification of terrorism and incitement of hatred against the Jewish community at pro-Hamas terror rallies across our country. At a Queen's Park rally in Toronto, genocidal slogans called for violent acts against innocent civilians. B'nai B'rith have reported these rallies that support a listed terrorist organization. Mr. Speaker, why has the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada been silent on such grotesque displays of anti-Semitism and incitement? Has he asked his provincial and territorial counterparts to enforce Canada's hate propaganda laws? Mr. Speaker, Canadians believe in the rule of law, not mob rule.
Having trouble in Toronto. Sounds like.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, far from being silent, our government has condemned all incitements to violence, all expressions of hate. Regularly, I talk to federal law enforcement authorities, the RCMP, CSIS, to understand what they're doing with provincial, territorial partners, municipal partners, to keep all communities safe. And Mr. Speaker, today I announced enhancements to the security infrastructure program to help all communities that are understandably concerned for their safety better prepare and discourage any potential act of violence. We're there to keep all communities safe, Mr. Speaker, and we'll continue to do that important work that all Canadians expect of us.
I don't know.
And with that comes the end of question
Well,
period.
well.
I see rising on a point of order is the honourable member.
So you'll see I flipped the side of my chest. That's just the cameras, right? So anyhow, guys, so that was a pretty fun episode. Temperatures are going up. Tempers are boiling over. Greg seems to have a new tone and more demanding, like his face and eyes look different. So he must be being fed up with nobody listening to him, because nobody does. It should be an interesting week. Maybe Trudeau's going to show up tomorrow. I'm pretty sure if he isn't, Poilievre will be hunting him down, throwing some mud, making some insults, and asking some questions. So that's it, guys. Canadian politics here. We're having a lot of fun with it. I enjoy hanging out with you guys, watching this stuff. It's great. Anyhow, like and subscribe. We're going to get going. Check out our other videos. There's lots there to look at. That's it, guys. We're heading out. Thanks for watching. Catch you next.